Hey, welcome to Faith in the Meantime. I'm Nate, and today we're looking at the question, how do I resolve misunderstandings? Step 1 is to go directly to the person. Now, this is very uncomfortable. I don't really like doing this a lot, but it's extremely effective, and it's the only way to resolve anything. And actually, it's following the example that Jesus instructs his disciples in Matthew 18. He says, if your brother or sister has sinned against you, go directly to them. And so really the only way that things are going to get better is by going directly to the person. That can happen in one of two ways, right? Either I set up a meeting with them because it's going to be the kind of thing where I need to set it up, or I can kind of spontaneously, I will have thought ahead about it a lot, but I can just approach that person and have the conversation right then and there. And obviously, depending on how loaded it is and the specifics of the scenario, will determine which of those two is appropriate. But a couple key things for this first step of going directly to the person. Number one, humility. The more that I can have an attitude of humility, the more I'm going to set up the whole thing for success. Number two, and this relates to humility, which is don't assume that I know all of what happened or why they did what they did. It's very tempting to assume, it's very easy to make assumptions, but they are not going to help us out. And a lot of times assumptions I don't realize I'm making them. It's just simply when a person says such and such, that must mean such and such. Well, if I said it, maybe that's how it would be meant. But the same actions done by two different people, or even interpreted differently by two different people, they often are not the same. And so that's another real important key to remember. And the third thing is, just a little confession here, but I've spent 20 or 30 minutes garnering up the courage within myself, praying, okay, Lord, help me to press send to call somebody. Or if I'm doing it with an email where I'm going to be setting up the meeting, man, I've taken like 6-10 drafts even to really craft that email. So even though it's usually a short communication or a text or whatever, I often will really take my time to make sure that the tone of what I'm communicating is, I want to work with you to resolve something, not, hey, you're wrong and I'm right. So that's basically all of step number one. Step number two is to prepare for the meeting, prepare for the time when I'm going to talk about the misunderstanding with the person. And a few key things that I do pretty much every time. The first and biggest one is simply try to make sure my heart and my mind are in a good place about it. In other words, maybe I do really need to vent. Maybe this is really bugging me. And in that case, I don't want to show up to the meeting to vent with the person. I do want to find a safe person, completely removed from the situation, not someone that is like tight with the person I'm having a disagreement or a misunderstanding with, but someone totally outside of it. Vent to them, vent to the Lord, whatever. So make sure I'm in a place to actually try to solve something and not just be upset or win an argument, right? Because in an argument, basically one person wins, the other person loses, and the relationship loses. But when we're resolving a misunderstanding, the goal is that I win, the other person wins, and our relationship wins. And so it's very different. Another key thing that I do in the preparation stage is sometimes I'll write down a timeline of what happened, because in the heat of the moment, whenever I'm having the conversation and my heart might be beating fast or whatever, it's easy to forget things. And so I kind of just make some notes. I usually don't end up referring to them in a meeting like that, but I have a couple of times with particularly loaded situations. And I've just found that to be really helpful so that I can kind of keep track of what happened when and where do we miss each other? Where did the misunderstanding happen? And then one other thing for getting ready for the meeting is that I want to look at what have I contributed. That is a huge question. We will have a whole other episode about that question. But what have I contributed? The more I can see what I've done or may have done that's led to increased misunderstanding, the more I'm going to come ready to take ownership and apologize for my part. And so that's probably the last main thing I would say for getting ready for the meeting. step 3 is to actually have the face-to-face with the person. And the keys for this are to ask good questions, to listen, to use good reflective listening skills, which is simply kind of stating back what you think you heard the person say. And so a lot of times I'll say, so if I hear you right, you feel like such and such, or if I hear you right, this really made you upset. And a lot of times when I use those, it has a way of disarming people. There are exceptions to that, people that I've had a very hard time disarming, but most of the time using reflective listening helps a lot. Coming ready to apologize and to take ownership, more than just saying the words "I'm sorry," although those can be very powerful words to say. But the more that I come ready to say, I think I did this, and that's part of what contributed to us missing each other here. The more I can do that, the better. And I would say maybe the last thing for the meeting itself is that to focus more on how can we collaborate moving forward, as opposed to hashing out everything from the past. And this does vary by situation, but in general, I've had a hard time getting completely on the same page about what happened. Except in my closest relationships, I'll take the time and effort, and the other person will take the time and effort to do that. But like for stuff that happens at work, for more peripheral relationships, usually focusing more on, okay, wow, we really misunderstood each other about this or about this, and then not necessarily going over every little detail of that. Again, that can be helpful and it can be necessary, but a lot of times, unless it's a very close relationship, I don't do that. And then I kind of said this earlier, but just to say it again, it takes a lot of courage to have these face-to-face meetings, and usually both parties are not enjoying it, or it's a very uncomfortable thing to do. And so kudos for even having the guts to do it and taking the courageous step to meet face-to-face. And the more that I've had these conversations, I have gotten much more comfortable than I was when I first started stepping up into resolving misunderstandings directly with these kinds of conversations. And then one other point is that people approach conflict and misunderstandings very differently. We each have our own unique conflict resolution style. In a future video, I will go more in depth on styles of conflict resolution, because that actually really factors into how this meeting goes and what happens, and different people approach conflict misunderstandings very differently from each other. So be on the lookout for that. If you liked this video, do me a favor, click subscribe, and I hope that you have a great time resolving all of your misunderstandings. See ya.